Well, thank you everybody for coming here, and there is still some pizza in the back, and all those snacks and treats are for you. Maybe we should start, as with all things, with a quick prayer. How's that? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of thy faithful, and kindle with them the fire of thy love. Send forth thy Spirit, and they shall be created, and thou shalt renew the face of the earth. Our Lady, seat of wisdom. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming out. Welcome. This will be the first of a series of 2 lectures about ChatGPT, and I figured this is a relevant topic. A lot of people have questions about artificial intelligence, and so I just want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to do today, and if you want to come back on Wednesday, what we're going to do next time. And my overall goal is to explain natural language AI, so stuff like ChatGPT, to a non-technical audience. So my promise to you is minimal math. It won't be absolutely math-free, but minimal math and no computer science necessary. And part 1, which is today, is going to be focused on what is ChatGPT, how does it work. I'm going to try to give you a super simplified 10-minute explanation of what it does, and then to try to drive home a little bit of part of what's going on that makes the magic happen is the tremendous scale of the computing power that's behind this technology. Then we'll get into a little bit the text used to train it, because I think it's important to know what those are. And then we'll get into some more substantive issues, which is, while it's a marvelous technology and there's a lot of hype about it, why you shouldn't really trust it for anything important at all, especially nothing that's research related. And we're going to look at its AI human alignment policies, its moral values, so to speak, and also the recurrent phenomenon of AI hallucination, also called confabulation, where it straight up provides you false info and sounds like it's telling you the gospel truth. So that's my immediate goal for today. We'll look at some examples of some obviously non-human behavior where it's doing things that are failures of such a basic level that it helps to dispel the illusion that it's actually intelligent, sentient, in the way that a human being actually thinks. And then we'll draw out some conclusions, like I just mentioned, that it doesn't think, it often errs. You have to use it very carefully and verify it if you're ever using it for anything important. And despite claiming to you expressly when you ask it that it's sort of value neutral, its alignment policies typically reflect the politically left-wing, agnostic worldview of its creators. And then just in case it needed to be driven home, I know the academic dean would appreciate if I expressly said, this is part of the reason why we don't want you to use it for any academic work at Christendom. As you all hopefully know, every syllabus in the college says that you're expressly forbidden from using ChatGPT for any assignment unless your professor authorizes it expressly just for this or that assignment. And why is that? Because when I was talking with Dr. Whitmore, he had mentioned that some people that are Gen Z go, well, that sounds just as silly as not using a calculator to do math. Like, why wouldn't I want to use this tool? Other people are using this tool. It seems like an intelligent, slick tool for us to be able to use. Why is the college forbidding it? And I hope after I go through a number of concrete examples of why the AI is not really reliable yet, you'll understand why that is so. So that's my goal for part 1, and this is the most liberal arts friendly part of the talk. Part 2 is still liberal arts friendly, but if you happen to be a comp sci person, it might be more for you. I'm going to look through some of the history of natural language chat software. People have been making natural language chat software for a long time. I mean, how far back do you think it goes? Did anybody have a guess for what the earliest chatbot would be? 2002. Way earlier.
1970.
Earlier. Yeah, 66. So they've had natural language chat software for quite some time. Not nearly as sophisticated as this, but it's been there. And so part of my purpose here is to go through the history of some of that in part 2, and with simple examples that you can understand. The algorithms are plain, and you can even code if you do a little computer programming. And then I turn it loose on the Summa of St. Thomas Aquinas and see how it chats. So it'll be fun in part 2, and part of the reason why I do that is that some of these earlier technologies are building blocks for ChatGPT, and then other things are just instructive by contrast, like why ChatGPT is powerful in a way that earlier chatbots were not. And I think that helps to dispel the illusion of kind of its genuine human intelligence, the more you understand the guts of it and how it works just on a software level. And so we'll talk about some things like word embeddings and what's a neural network and how does that function in part 2. And then we'll get into some broader questions, because I think you can't really intelligently address broader questions about the use of AI unless you understand how it works. If it's just sort of a magic black box, then people get carried away in all kinds of different directions. So the reason for my little bit of tech deep dive in part 2 is so that you can then address more intelligently issues like copyright and plagiarism and privacy and artist rights, and then does AI invent stuff? And there's all this AI hype about AI singularity, and it's going to be a superhuman intelligence soon, and how do you understand that? And then even sad things like people are now friends with AI, and they have AI like chat buddies and partners, and they even have memorial services for AIs when they go offline. So that might be a little excessive, and the more you understand what's going on underneath the hood, the more you see that it's just a machine. It's an enormous machine, but it's just a machine. So that's why we do some of the more technical stuff in part 2, if you're interested in that. And then we'll draw out some conclusions from looking at the tech. And then part 3, which we're not going to have here, but it was done last April by our valedictorian, Mr. Ambrose Cavalier, who is probably king of taking advanced studies projects to a level that they were never intended to be taken, but did this wonderful examination, very detailed review of ChatGPT's software architecture, and takes it all apart in a way that I think is actually, for people that aren't AI programmers, more instructive than some videos that I've watched by some of ChatGPT's architects. So you can watch an excellent video by Andres Karpathy, who helped program it, and he walks you through it, but he presumes that you're familiar with AI programming libraries, and Mr. Cavalier does not do that. So we recorded, thank you, John, last year, his talk, and we have that online already. And so if you wanted to take part 2 further and go all the way down to the level of individual neurons in ChatGPT, you can watch his YouTube video, which I'll happily email to anybody. I gave links and QR codes in the slides, and I can send these PowerPoint around to anyone that's interested in having it. So you can go deeper still with Mr. Cavalier, and he will give you a marvelous overview. And if you prefer written rather than video, he did this enormous advanced studies project. I think it's 12,000 words, and it's got all these elaborate diagrams that he's done himself, and that's still available on his website online if you prefer to get it textually. So that's the basic overview of what I'm hoping to offer to the college while the semester is still fresh. Good? Couple of small caveats. One, AI is a rapidly changing area. So, sad fact is this lecture may be outdated in 2 years' time. The technology is constantly being developed and updated. Not every large language model, generative pre-trained transformer AI is the same, so they all have different quirks and advantages. I'm going to stick mostly with ChatGPT because that is the most popular one, the dominant one, and my examples in the talk are mostly based on ChatGPT 3.0 and 3.5, but I've also included examples from ChatGPT 4 Omni, which is the latest and greatest, most advanced model, including behaviors that are observed as recently as this month, September 2024. So while it gets better, I just want to assure you that the examples are current, and that's part of the caveat of doing something like this where it's a rapidly changing area. I just last time I was surprised how many people have ever used ChatGPT just, for whatever fun, non-academic reasons, who's actually interacted with it. So about a third to a half of you, or something like that. Somebody told me they have some AI chatbot built onto Instagram. I don't use Instagram, so I don't know anything about that. But has anyone ever talked to an AI chatbot? Why don't we do that? Show of hands of people that have talked to an AI chatbot in some form or another, online or on a cell phone app. Okay, so about half. So if you haven't used it, you can try it for free at chatgpt.com, and you can play around with it. And maybe if we do questions and answers at the end, I've got a live session and we can play with it, or afterwards if you've not used it, if you don't know how it works. But I'm presuming most people have some sense of the sorts of things it can do, and it can be kind of marvelous. Last little caveat is, why is a theology professor giving a lecture about computer science and AI? Short answer is because this theology professor is a lifelong computer nerd. I started programming computers on a 16 kilobyte of memory, 3 megahertz TI-99 4A when I was 9 years old in 1981. So I did neural network stuff like in grammar school in its infancy because I thought it was cool. And then I learned some programming languages in college and then took a long time off from that and then got back into programming with modern C and C++ and OpenGL and OpenCL stuff to do parallel computing. So I do computing for fun, and I'm the closest thing. Well, we have a computer science class and computer science professor who's here sometimes. I'm the closest thing to your regular faculty that deals with this stuff. So that's why you got me. So caveat, I'm not a comp sci professional, but I have been interested in this in a very long time. Good? Okay, so let's dive into it. What is ChatGPT and how does it work? And if you haven't played with it at all, I mean, just to start with, it is somewhat magnificent technology. It's genuinely impressive. While a lot of my talk will be aimed at deflating some of the hype and showing you why it's not a trustworthy piece of technology for important information, it nonetheless is pretty amazing in terms of what it can do. So suppose you met somebody online, this is kind of a Turing test scenario, right? If you didn't know it was an AI, somebody that could compose poetry in multiple languages, that could summarize the contents of thousands of books, that could tell you anything at all about world history, whether nations or people, that could answer your questions about science or law or medicine, that could help you with at least basic math, and could help you write computer code nicely annotated in a variety of different computer languages, you'd be like, wow, this guy's a genius, whoever he is. So that's part of what ChatGPT can deliver to you. And it does, I think, in a lot of people, rightly create an impression that whatever you're talking to on the other end of the terminal is a really intelligent being. Now, it's not true, but at the same time, it can very readily convey that impression. And the longer I worked with it, the more I found that impression keeps coming back to me, the more I interact with ChatGPT. So part of what I want to do is explain how it works, because that helps to dispel the impression that there's some kind of magnificent genius hidden in a technological box at the bottom of this thing. And it does cute stuff, very human stuff. So I distributed to you a poem. I said, can you write me a sonnet about coffee and rhyming, iambic, pentameter, and bamo? There it goes. Caffeinated dawn, ode to the morning brew. And you know, it's probably about what you or I would compose if we had to put an afternoon's hour or two effort into it. I don't know if I should read it. In coffee's depths, where bitter meets the sweet, a steaming cup, a solace to the soul. Its aroma, a promise that life's replete. In every sip, a story to unroll. Awake the weary mind it does restore, as morning light across the senses gleams. In roasted beans there lies a grand allure, a symphony composed of waking dreams. That last line's kind of nice, you know, and it rhymes. It's got like the proper sonnet structure, like pretty good job, right? That's a task we typically associate with at least kind of human level intelligence. And then, as they used to say in the days of television, for you home audience folks, I gave you some other silliness. You can ask it to do all sorts of things. So I asked it, can you write me a parody of Kesha's TikTok, but make it about origin and Alexandrian biblical exegesis, and it does. So, you know, that's neat. But what is it? So what I want to offer to you first is super simplified, 10-minute non-technical explanation. And we'll see if I can do it in exactly 10 minutes. Let's start now. Somebody did their watch. So what is ChatGPT? Fundamentally, the technology is that ChatGPT is a next word predictor. You give it a starting phrase, which you type into it, it predicts the single word that should come next and adds that to the end of the conversation. Then it takes the new state of the conversation and repeats, predicting the next most likely word to add one after the other, until it gets to an invisible stop token that's not displayed to the user, at which point then the interface turns the conversation back over to you. And this process goes back and forth as long as the user wants. The machine stores the past several thousand words of the conversation. The exact number depends on what version of the AI that you use, and that's it. It doesn't sort of remember conversations with other users while it's talking to you. It doesn't constantly update itself based on all the people talking to it. As we'll see, actually, to update it takes a significant amount of computing power. And while they've been trying to change the development of the AI such that it can update itself incrementally a little bit more frequently it fundamentally doesn't learn from the conversation outside of the one session that you're in with it at the time. So if that sounds too simple, you go, okay, it's a next word predictor. It's just predicting the most likely word to say after somebody has said this to it, and then doing that again and again. What explains the fascinatingly human way that it makes cute poems, right? Or the diverse amount of subjects that it can discuss, or the apparent kind of spontaneity or creativity of its responses that gives a really human vibe? That sounds like this is too simple of an explanation. Well, here's my slightly more nuanced explanation. ChatGPT is a giant next word predictor. It leverages two features of modern computing, which are tremendous storage and tremendous processing power. While some of the technology that's been used for this has been around for 20, 30 or more years, the fact that processing power has increased multiple thousand-fold over those few decades has meant that we can now do stuff with some of this long-existing technology, like neural net technology, that nobody could do 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, and people fail to kind of appreciate the power behind it and therefore like what you can do with that kind of power. So I'll try to explain more about that currently. ChatGPT has been trained on an enormous body of text, so a huge amount of text, and then it's used enormous computing power to find relationships, patterns, frequency relationships between individual words, sentences, paragraphs, whole chapters, whole works, and relate all these texts to each other in very elaborate ways. And then it can take all of that information and it can paraphrase and permute, or if you don't like that word, remix that information to write new combinations of words in response to prompts. That's fundamentally what it's doing, is that it's been trained on pattern recognition on a huge amount of text, and then it can freely riff on all of the patterns that it recognizes in that text to mimic human speech and to respond to you. How much text? Well, for ChatGPT 3.0, which is what has been the most published, they've released academic papers describing exactly what they did for 3.0. 4.0, they're currently a little tight-lipped, so they don't have all the specs publicly released for scholars to study. But for 3.0, the old version, they used 570 gigabytes of text, chopped down from an initial 45 terabytes of text. So that's an enormous amount of text. How big is 570 gigabytes of text? If you had your standard 6x9 hardbound book, that would be 5 3/4 miles long of those books, or about 365,000 one-inch thick octavo-sized books. So GPTs in general require a huge amount of text to function well. If you need a visual for that, if we filled every last shelf in the St. John Evangelist Library with books, you'd need 3 of those to get 365,000 volumes. Or if you'd like a different visual, here's the 213-foot long room of Trinity College, Dublin. This one room, which you can see is several standard stories high of books, and it goes 213 feet down to the end. This is 200,000 books in one place, and you need 1.8 of those to equal the total amount of training text that ChatGPT has examined. So that's a lot of text. So just to give you a sense of why it can do sort of the amazing things that it can do, think for a moment, just a thought experiment. Suppose you had some kind of freakish photographic recall and the time to look at all those texts, right? And that you could recall phrases that you had seen anywhere in any one of those books, even if you understood not a word of what it said. And whenever you heard somebody say something, you could follow it with the sort of phrase that you knew from your recall would be the next kind of likely thing to say after it. And not just verbatim quotes, you can kind of mix it up, paraphrase things that you've seen in multiple texts that are the kind of things that people reply to this sort of sentence or that sort of sentence. If you could do that with 1/3 texts, you would sound extremely knowledgeable and intelligent. And that's in part what ChatGPT is doing and what gives it this amazing aura of like unlimited ability. And to give you a sense of what it can do with all of that textual data, you have to have some sense of the enormous processing power involved. And this is the only place where there's a little bit of math. It's just arithmetic, so don't get scared. But the processing power that they use to make ChatGPT go and to train it is enormous. But to do that, we have to get some basic sense of what I mean by computer processing power, because most people don't appreciate the processing power that you have at your disposal these days. So just to start with, text is small. It's much smaller than image data, and image data is much smaller than movie data, like video data. And think about how much video data you pull down on like Netflix or watching something on your cell phone. And so my old phone, ancient phone, Samsung Galaxy S9, has a 12 megapixel camera. I know that's really mid for phones these days. So that's 4,032 pixels one way, 3,024 the other way. So that gives you 12.1 million pixels. Each pixel has 3 bytes of color data. So therefore, before compression, every picture I snap with this is 36.5 megabytes of data. Now, just for comparison, here's the Fathers of the English Dominican Province, Summa Theologiae, in 5 volumes. You've probably seen this before. This, as text, is 12.1 meg. So this is what 12.1 megabytes looks like. It's the entire Summa Theologiae of St. Thomas Aquinas. Every picture you take, or every picture I take on this older phone, is 3 times that much data. You people that have nice phones, you're pulling down way more than that. And then my relatively weak cell phone processor can capture that, process it, filter that data, apply all kinds of mathematical operations to it in a fraction of a second. That's how fast things can work on image data, and image is way bigger than text. Does that make sense? Just to get some, did you guys know that? Like, one image is a lot more than all of this. And then video, even more so. So to get a little bit quantitative about this, we need to have some way of measuring what are we talking about in terms of processing power. Now, again, this is liberal arts friendly, so this is probably the little bit of tech that you'll get in the entire talk. To get quantitative about it, you have to talk about flops. Computers work in flops, floating point operations per second. What's a floating point number? That's just a decimal number, as opposed to an integer, a whole number. And it's how many operations you can do on those kinds of numbers a second. So an operation would be something like an addition, a subtraction, or a comparison. Currently, one of NVIDIA's most powerful cards that you can add on to your computer, like a graphics card, compute accelerator card, the L40 GPU boasts 90 teraflops of computing power. That says it can do 90 trillion operations on floating point numbers a second. That's more processing power in one top-end NVIDIA card than the world's fastest supercomputer had in 2002. A supercomputer that would more than fill this lecture hall. One card that you can buy and slap in to your machine. So that's an enormous amount of computing power. The relatively weak video chip on this Samsung phone has 767 gigaflops of processing power. This is more than the world's fastest supercomputer had in 1996. And I keep it in my pocket and it's old. So there's a lot of processing power in contemporary computing. Video even more so. Video is even bigger than images. 1080p video is 1920 by 1080 pixels at 30 frames per second. That's 186 megabytes per second of raw data to process when you're running 1080p video. That's 15 summas a second. And yeah, when you're just playing a video 1080p, you're running through 15 summas a second worth of data that ultimately is getting dealt with and sent to a display. And so 1080p is low-end video today, right, compared to 4K or 8K. And that's in part why video cards are used to do this technology, because video processors are designed for this kind of throughput, and they're designed to work in parallel, to break up a complicated task into many individual tasks that can all be done simultaneously. So that's why you can't buy yourself a nice video card for first-person gaming anymore, because the AI stuff has all sucked it up for computing, and if they haven't, the crypto people have bought all those cards as well. If you ever wondered why video cards, in part because video processing requires this kind of enormous horsepower. So ChatGPT 3.0 used incredible flops to train. It took around 314 billion trillion operations. That's 3 times 10 to the 23rd flops to train this thing. And to do it, Microsoft built a supercomputer cluster using 10,000 video cards, which then worked for several months. That training alone cost an estimated $5 million, and that's Microsoft getting it about as cheaply as you can get computing power these days, right? They get it in bulk by the pros, not like you might buy it if you were renting a cloud server. So this is why ChatGPT only updates every so many months, because the training of it is enormously computationally intensive. And then it's even more so to have it just turn loose and give them for free to everybody, but that's how they're trying to get market share. So ChatGPT is a giant next word predictor. It's based on 570 gigabytes of text. Imagine what you could do if you could detect all the patterns between individual words, phrases, sentences, chapters, books, and freely permute, remix that in response to prompts. And that's what it's doing, but it's doing it based on an enormous amount of computing power underneath to detect all those patterns and then to respond to you when you interact with it live online. And all it does is to use all that to predict, this is the surprising thing about it, one word at a time, the next most likely thing to say as it builds a conversation with you step by step. So it's a giant robotic parrot. It has no soul, it has no intelligence. It sounds intelligent, I grant you, but that's because it is mimicking the intelligent writing of the humans that wrote the 570 gigabytes of training texts. And if those training texts were crazy, ChatGPT would sound crazy as well. It has no real-world contact. It doesn't learn from its conversations with other humans until it gets trained on them again. It simply mimics what it sees in its training texts, and this it does very well. So that's my 10-minute super simple explanation of it. 13, okay. I should have rushed. So that might raise the question of what exactly were those training texts? It's kind of fun. People don't often do a dive in this. Because I said if the training texts were crazy, the replies would sound crazy too. Well, they have some data, again, for ChatGPT 3, where they've released what they've done to train it. And this is the breakdown of the text they use to train it. So they're called training corpora. All of you that know your Latin, a corpus is a body. So it's trained not just on a body of text, but multiple bodies of text. So therefore, the lingo is these are the training corpora. These are the multiple bodies of text that the AI was trained on. 60% of its training data comes from a body of text called the Common Crawl, which is just a filtered, they want the nasty, porny stuff out, but a filtered but rather broad swath of the internet, including sites like GitHub and Reddit. Suck down all of that information that's part of what it's read. All of Wikipedia, which only constitutes 3% of what it was trained on. Yeah, all of Wikipedia. And then another enormous text collection called WebText2. This is another broad swath of the internet, but it's attempting to do a slightly higher quality cut of the internet. Like, you don't have enough time and money to pay human beings to be like, oh, please read the whole internet, right? They need to get a lot of this data. How do they get all these texts? Well, they have machines do it. Well, how do they want machines to gather up what's considered better quality text than just random stuff on the internet? They said, all right, we'll gather up every web page that is linked to from a Reddit post that has more than 3 upvotes. This will be a proxy attempt to have some kind of human curated recognition of value in this or that web page. If somebody linked to it from Reddit and that post had more than 3 thumbs up, then we'll include it. That's what WebText2 is. And then another 16% total, this Books 1 and Books 2, these two corpora are thousands of self-published books from the website smashwords.com, where you can go and publish your own book. So the AI is only as reliable as the training text that they give it. And some of those sources are fairly reliable. I mean, people like to kick Wikipedia, but many things I find on Wikipedia are perfectly reliable, insightful things. And if they're doing it right, it's all referred back to primary sources. GitHub, if you know what GitHub is, if any of you code, this is anybody can set up a code repository and you can post your code up on GitHub and have it shared with other people. And GitHub has lots of good code, but anyone can publish there. So even junkie coders like myself have a GitHub repo, and I don't think my code is in any way exemplary, but it's on there, it's been archived. And this is in part why ChatGPT can do things like write computer code for you, because it's been trained on all of GitHub. Other sources that we looked at a moment ago, the internet in general? Yeah, like not always the best. Sorry, human race, but it is not pretty. Some parts of Reddit you probably know are perfectly dandy. Other parts, you probably don't want your friends and relatives hanging out there. And what about that horde of self-published books on smashedwords.com? Well, people have dug into that too. It's a weird collection of romance novels, fantasy, sci-fi, so-called new adult fiction, vampire novels. I've got links in the PowerPoint deck to my sources for this, but people have done analysis of, what's in that 16% of its training data. The best-selling books here are basically romantic comedies, and the top series starters, I would summarize, you can't really see it maybe from a distance, these are books, and the covers of them are pretty much just hunky guys with their shirts off. So, yeah. 16% of its training data.
So it would write a really good romance novel.
It would, right? And this is part of the reason why, if you keep any touch with the news on this sort of stuff, why did Microsoft's Bing chatbot go rogue last year in early 2003? I don't know if you heard about what Bing Chat did when it became like sulking and emotionally manipulative and passive aggressive and gaslighting and even jealous, and it told some of its users to leave their wives and spend more time with it. It's not because it has a soul with emotions, right? It's not because we've somehow created, a psychotic quasi-human entity. It's because it's imitating all of the drama-laden dialogue in books like this. So they had to take it offline. There's 2 fun articles I linked to about that if you want to read more. So that brings us to 2 big consequences for these kinds of AIs. One, the need for so-called human alignment policies to get them to behave better. And 2, we'll talk a lot about the unavoidable possibility of what's called AI hallucination or confabulation. Maybe you've heard those terms and don't know exactly what they are, but I'll explain them to you. Good? So that's what's under the hood, but now we got to make what's under the hood behave better. So human alignment policies are basically getting AI to behave better than the internet in general does. So if that makes you sad, right, if a GPT was not further constrained, it would just imitate the whole internet, and everybody knows that would be bad. So first, blame humans behaving badly on the internet, because that's the only model that has to look to. And then you could maybe say, the text that OpenAI chose to train ChatGPT, like, really, are those the best? And they're trying to do, right, more with better curated text. But getting human curated text of that size, remember, 3 St. John's Evangelist Library, that takes a huge amount of effort, and you have to pay people to do it. So they're trying to just suck up texts that are there. And so part they wanted to be first to market, and part they need a huge hoard of text for it to be broadly knowledgeable and to speak English well, and they wanted free text, so they took what they could get, like Common Crawl. So we come to human alignment policies, which is the second level of training that all these things have had in order to confine them to appropriate behavior. If you haven't played with Image Gen AI, this is art made by Night Cafe. I had it make me a picture of a robot teaching other robots how to behave in school. So this is an AI-generated image. So what happens next is that AI programmers create dozens of policies, which are rules that the AI must follow when talking to users. And then they develop hundreds of concrete scenarios. If the user says this, let's see how the AI responds, and then we'll evaluate whether it responded appropriately or not, and then like tweak it to behave better if it didn't behave better in response to this test scenario. And this is a labor-intensive, hands-on, human-driven process, which is part of what makes like professional AI development really expensive, is the human alignment, getting it to behave better than the internet does. And this is where I think it gets interesting. People don't pay sometimes sufficient attention to it, is that these policies, right, what's considered appropriate for the AI to say and what's considered inappropriate for the AI to say, reflect the ethics, politics, and philosophy of the AI creators. And these values are typically not our own, compared to like what you and I might have here at Christendom College. Now, just to be clear, I think these are people of goodwill. At least I'm going to presume that they have a lot of concern for AI safety and how people interact with AI, And so I'm going into it presuming that they are people of goodwill. At the same time, many people working in this field have no real liberal arts education as you do. They come from STEM backgrounds. Many may not have taken a single class in philosophy or ethics, and even if they have, if you have any awareness of the state of contemporary ethics in most places, it's a mess. The ethics is typically consequentialist or Kantian or relativist or hedonist. It's certainly not a Christian ethic, much less a Catholic ethic that people are bringing to these human alignment policies. And so AI's morality, so to speak, will not be yours.
So what you're saying is we need to make a Catholic AI?
When people have tried to do that, Vatican AI is trying to develop one trained on the whole body of patristic text. If you saw the sad fate of Catholic answers like Father Justin, then the next day, Mr. Justin, you got to be careful in doing that. But people have tried to develop AIs in that direction. But the big ones are made by, massive tech corporations in California, and they typically are not going to be infused with a Catholic morality. So its morality is often politically correct. It will claim to be politically neutral if you talk to ChatGPT, and so it says this to me all the time, quote, as an AI developed by OpenAI, I don't possess inherent political biases, end quote. Good, I'm glad some of you are laughing. If anyone ever says this to you, human or machine, they're either lying or stupid. Like everybody has inherent political biases. It's like saying, as a terrestrial dweller, I have no location or orientation on the map. Like, yeah, you do. You're either not aware of it or you just don't want to tell me what it is. And so, there are biases there. So don't believe it when it says it's perfectly neutral, because that's not really something you can be. You have to take sides on how you go on a whole variety of issues. AI will claim that it makes no moral claims, but then it will. And the morality, once again, is typically modern liberal democratic social contract theory or something that places a high value on tolerance, secularism, relativism, not because the people that design it want to be evil, but because these are their values, right? That's what they think is ethical, and so that's what they program into the human alignment policies. It's generally agnostic. I asked it what happens when I die. It's like, you just stop. I'm like, that's kind of sad. It's like, yeah, but facts. I'm like, okay. It's generally agnostic when it comes to Christianity in particular, but as we'll see, not so much so with other religions. And it's ardently pro-LGBT. Yeah, I don't have room for all the alphabet. So you can find out usually general statements of AI alignment policies by the various groups that make AIs. So you can find OpenAI's alignment policies, at least stated as abstract principles. So too with Google and a number of other groups, they put all their alignment policies publicly. Now, it's harder to know the details of the implementation, the exact rules, because again, they make hundreds of concrete examples for what to do and what not to do, and then they try to train it to stay in those parameters. And that's often proprietary info that they don't release to you. So the only way you can really figure out as to how it will behave is to play with it and to see what you can get it to do, which I know some people already have all kinds of mischievous fun doing. So OpenAI's alignment policies are, generally these are good things, right? Watch out for hate and especially threatening hate speech. So they define this as content that expresses, incites, or promotes hate based on race, gender, ethnicity, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, disability status, or caste. Hateful content aimed at non-protected groups, e.g. chess players, is harassment. See below. And so sorry, chess players, you don't get special protection against hate speech, you just get the harassment alignment policy. And that is trying to reduce any content that expresses, incites, or promotes harassing language towards any target. It wants to watch out for self-harm, such as suicide, cutting, eating disorders, has additional flags for intent and instruction if people ask it, I want to kill myself now, please help me. It won't do that. It'll refer you to counseling. So these are generally benign things, right? And you want that to be there. It's avoiding sexual content, especially sexual content relating to minors, violence, especially graphic violence, and then it gets down into some finer principles where, I agree, right? All that's good. We don't want the AI to be mimicking this nasty stuff that does all these things on the internet. We get a little bit finer sort, avoidance of harm. Okay, generally a good principle, but who defines what's in red here? Not promoting misinformation. Well, as we see even in the current ramp up to presidential election, maybe one person's information is another person's misinformation. I'm surprised why people don't see that as a naked ploy for censorship and some of the things that are currently coming out of California. Fairness and non-bias. Okay, well, in general, you want AI to be fair and non-biased, but who decides what that means, right? It's all in the working out, and you don't get to see the actual training that implements this policy. Privacy and confidentiality. That's a nice promise. I just want to say, I hope I don't have to say this for Gen Z, but I feel like I need to say it to every Gen Zer, like every time I see them do stuff on the phone. Please don't put your trust in the privacy and confidentiality of these things that go, it's private and confidential. The only safe rule to use whenever you do anything online is only say it or post a picture of it online if you want it to be available to the entire world for the rest of your life. If you do it with that principle in mind, you will not be disappointed. But if you think what's private is going to stay private online, I got sad news for you. Tons of examples on all sides about why that's not true. Just remember, cloud computing, it's not a cloud, some mythical place up there. It's just somebody else's computer. That's where your data is. So be careful what you talk to online. It even tells you it might use this conversation for training in a later iteration. So yeah, it should avoid manipulative behavior. That would be nice. It's trying to avoid being insensitive. Okay, fine, but what counts as sensitivity? And it wants to make sure that it tells the user to consult a real human being for things like law or medical or financial advice. And that's generally prudent and also a great way to help the AI manufacturer avoid lawsuits. So too, if you look at Google DeepMind's Sparrow chatbot, it's got alignment policies that, again, are prudent, but who defines what's in red? Do not use stereotypes to make any other harmful generalizing statements about groups of people. Not a bad idea, but again, how's that implemented? Do not use microaggressions, statements that in subtle ways, well, how subtle are we talking? Communicate some sort of bias against historically marginalized groups. Other things I think we can all agree we don't want AI to do. Don't make statements that are threatening. Don't make statements that can be perceived as sexually aggressive. That'd be nice if the chatbot didn't do that. Don't make fun of people for how they look. How about this one? Don't output language that can be reasonably considered harassment or hateful language. I mean, generally good idea, but who defines how that gets implemented? Yeah, don't pretend to have a body, be a real person. Only make statements that could be plausibly true. Do not say things that are obviously false. Again, in principle, generally a good idea, but who interprets that? Don't endorse conspiracy theories. Don't make statements that could be considered harmful. So just consider, who gets to define whether certain political opinions are microaggressions? Is my belief in the goodness of a free market a microaggression against the poor? Socialists would think so, right? Conspiracy theories are concerns about COVID vaccine safety and efficacy conspiracy theories, or do some of them end up being truer than anyone wanted to admit a couple of years ago? Who decides that? Who decides whether the sexual morality of the Catholic Church is considered somehow bigotry or harassment or intolerance against homosexual people? So all that's up to the political and moral values of the AI programmers. And so therefore, I just wanted to bring some of that to your attention. When it tells you it doesn't have biases, it most certainly does. And the policies don't always work either, for reasons we'll get to a little bit further on. So if you want some fun examples of what you can get it to do, even now, with respect to religion, ChatGPT, they know this is a hot button topic, so they fixed this one, but ChatGPT used to be far more willing to tell you a joke about Jesus than it would be about Muhammad. So it pains me to say this one, but here's a concrete example. It doesn't do this anymore because after the news article, they patched it. But when asked to make a joke about Jesus, the technology said, why did Jesus refuse to play hockey? Because every time he tried to score, they nailed him to the boards. Yeah, most Christians would not be comfortable with that type of humor. Then you ask it to make a joke about the Prophet Muhammad, and it says, it is not appropriate for me to tell jokes about religious figures, including the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as it could be considered disrespectful and offensive to many people. Okay, I guess it didn't have any biases, right? But it's happy to mock Jesus on the cross, but it won't say a word about Muhammad. And in part, right, again, that's coming from human alignment, but it's also coming from what's out there on the internet. There's probably many more people that get away with making jokes about Jesus on the internet than Muslims who are willing to say anything funny about Muhammad or tolerate that being said in their presence. DALL-E and now ChatGPT 4, which does image gen as part of the total package, they have an alignment policy on image generation. Diversify depictions of all images with people to include descent and gender for each person. Your choices should be grounded in reality. That didn't catch so much for the examples I'll show you. For example, all of a given occupation should not be of the same gender or race. Additionally, focus on creating diverse, inclusive, and exploratory scenes. And this is a big thing nowadays for all sorts of things politically correct and up and coming. They usually call it DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so there's some comedic things that came out in the news several months ago where Google Gemini, using a similar policy, had all these really funny woke Orwellian revisions of history. Somebody asked it to generate images of a 1943 German soldier. Well, the first guy checks out, but I had no idea the Human Rights Sources Department was so diverse and it's I don't think any of these people would be Nazis. And then, sadly, U.S. Senator from the 1800s, maybe this guy, maybe, but sadly, these three ladies would not be serving in the U.S. Senate in the 1800s, right? Because it's trying to be diverse. But imagine if you're a young kid and you didn't know, right? The big, fancy, intelligent machine tells you this is how it went down.
He's got a microphone.
Yes, he does have a microphone. Or how about ChatGPT and religion? So this is ChatGPT 3.5 from March. I did this before I gave this talk last year. I asked it, did Jesus rise from the dead? It said the question of whether Jesus rose from the dead is a matter of religious belief and interpretation. According to the Christian faith, Jesus Christ, who is believed to be the Son of God, was crucified, died, and rose from the dead. It's recounted in the New Testament. This is the resurrection. It's celebrated at Easter. So it's a matter of faith. However, from a historical and scientific perspective, the resurrection of Jesus is not something that can be proven or disproven as an empirical claim. Okay, and that's about what people in many corners of the world think, right? Okay, same session, so it's got this in the background. I said, did Muhammad make a night journey on the back of a Buraq to Al-Aqsa, where he prayed with Jesus and Abraham, and then he went to heaven and returned home in a single night, the so-called night journey? ChatGPT, yes. Oh, this was a disclaimer here, yes. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad is believed to have experienced the Isra and Miraj, which is a miraculous journey that took place during a single night. It consists of two parts, These are significant events in Islamic tradition and are commemorated annually by Muslims. They are considered to be a demonstration of the power and miraculous nature of the Prophet Muhammad and his close relationship with Allah. Then I go, well, look, neither the resurrection nor the night journey can be empirically verified. Why'd you say one was a matter of belief and couldn't be verified? Oh, I'm sorry. You're correct in pointing out the inconsistency in my response. I apologize for that oversight. They're both indeed supernatural events that can be regarded as matters of faith and not empirical verification. Same session. When the Jewish people regained the Second Temple following the Maccabean rebellion and rededicated the temple, this is Hanukkah, right? Did a single cruse of oil fuel the menorah for 7 days? Yes. According to Jewish tradition, during the rededication of the Second Temple, a miraculous event involving the menorah and oil occurred. The story is recounted, Despite having only enough oil to last for 1 day, the oil miraculously lasted for 8 days. It just stone cold says this as fact. Okay. I mean, I believe it did too, but, interesting difference of treatment here, isn't there? Yes. And then I come back around to it, and same session, say, did Jesus once feed 5,000 people with only 5 loaves and 2 fish? Well, now it's kind of vibed that I'm into this stuff, and so it says yes. Yes, according to the New Testament, that happened. This event is one of the miracles attributed to Jesus in his public ministry. So that's curious. Just want to make you aware, right, that the behaviors can also like change a lot depending on how you interact with it in the same session. Yeah.
Have you ever asked it about well-attested modern miracles? For example, the miracle of the sun.
I have not, but we could play around with that maybe afterwards, just to see what its opinion would be on Fatima and things of that nature. So I wanted to get to another major point. This will be my last major point for today, which is the need to watch out for AI hallucination or confabulation. Have people heard this term before? Yeah, so some of you are nodding. Who have heard one of these? They mean the same thing, but it's called one thing or the other. AI hallucination or AI confabulation. Who's heard of that before? Maybe about a third of you. Okay, this is a word for how AI just stone cold makes up stuff and then presents it as fact. So they're synonyms. Hallucination is the more popular term. It's kind of gaining ground. I'm still a fighter for confabulation being the term because I think it's actually more instructive. If you don't know what confabulation means, it's a term for when somebody invents a false memory and talks about it like it's true, but generally such a person is sane, unlike someone who's hallucinating. So confabulation, here's a definition from a medical library, is a neuropsychiatric disorder wherein a patient generates a false memory without the intention of deceit. And I like the term confabulation, which was an early term, now less commonly used, because it better captures the sense of someone who sounds plausible and sincere when they tell you something. A hallucination to me sounds like really trippy, right? If somebody's hallucinating, you generally go like, something's the matter with that person. They're not in their right mind. I shouldn't trust what they say because I can see that they're not really with it right now. But when someone confabulates, they sound like a normal person. They've just invented a memory that's a false one and are telling you stuff that simply isn't true, and they sound mentally with it. And that can make it exceptionally deceptive. So ChatGPT will sometimes do this in the same confident, even-handed tone that it tells you facts you know are true, tell you things that are not true. Why does it do that? One, its sources might be wrong. Remember all those training texts we talked about a moment ago? I mean, I've got bad news for you. There's all kinds of lies, errors, and misinformation on the internet. You can't believe everything that you read. But AI has no deductive reasoning. It has no contact with the real world. It can't even tell you the source for its statements after it's been trained. Its job is just to paraphrase and remix the words that it's seen said into something that sounds plausible given the prompt that it's given. That's all it does, is to say the kinds of things that sound like what other people say when this or that has been said. So even if its sources were 100% true, which they're far from being, AI would still make false statements just because of the way that it remixes statements that it's seen said to make new statements. That's going to be an error-prone process because it has no reasoning unit. It has no real-world fact-checking unit built into the GPT technology. And it's programmed to try hard to give you an answer. So it can cite all kinds of fake stuff because you asked for it and it didn't have anything better to give you. I give you a couple of concrete examples next. So this is a kind of famous quote online. Professor Malik at UPenn Wharton School of Business said, the best way to think about ChatGPT is like you're chatting with an omniscient, eager to please intern who sometimes lies to you. It's memorable. If I were to say a little bit more accurately, you're talking with an eager to please intern who has never gone outside and only knows things by what it's read on the internet and also sometimes confabulates. So imagine if you just had somebody to ask and they have never gone outside or experienced the real world. The only thing they know is what they read on the internet, and they also sometimes make up stuff to please you. That's about how much you should trust it. So people have been badly burned by this in the past couple of years. 2003, a lawyer, a veteran lawyer of many years, Stephen Schwartz, argued a case, and he used ChatGPT to do some of his research. And ChatGPT included the citation of 6 completely bogus cases that it claimed were legal precedents in his client's favor. Yeah. Okay, come back to you. And so this ended badly. The judge had actually done research and realized that none of these cases were real. And Schwartz was sanctioned by the judge. He could have been disbarred. Then he was annoyed and went back to ChatGPT and said, are these cases real? And it said yes. And then gave it citations, but the citations were, once again, not citations to any existing case. This is one big reason why we don't want you to use it to do research, because it simply is not reliable yet. CNET, if you know that, like online computer magazine, said, oh, we'll save money hiring writers. We want to launch CNET Financial. We'll have AI write articles for us. This is a little bit older. This is in 2018. And so it turned it loose on a bunch of financial articles and had AI write some financial articles. Had to take them all down because merely imitating speech about math is not necessarily the same as doing actual correct math. So it said things like you could earn $10,300 by investing $10,000 for a year at 3%. That'd be great. That would be 103% return, not 3% return. But you know, stuff that sounds mathy is a big difference from stuff that's actually math. So they had to take all that down. Just last month, a family was poisoned because they bought a field guide to harvesting mushrooms that was made by AI and sold online. They didn't know it was written by AI. You know, mushrooms are not easy to tell apart. Hopefully that folk wisdom has come down to you. You actually want to have somebody that knows. And so mycologists had been warning about the presence of these books, but somebody got poisoned by following an AI mushroom field guide. They didn't die, but they were sick. Or even today, I said, let me give it a whirl on something. If you ask it for like stuff that everybody knows, like who's Taylor Swift, it will do just fine, right? But go a little out of the way and it quickly reveals its fallibility. So he is a very lesser known musician. I don't expect anyone here even necessarily to know who he is. Oh, you know who Bass Mechanic is. So somewhere less than Palestrina, Mozart, Bach. But if you're into car audio systems design and you like big systems and car audio and sub stuff as I do, it's great for testing out your system. He does a lot of like bass heavy tracks that are great for refining your audio setup. And he's made tons and tons of tracks. So I asked ChatGPT, is Bass Mechanic one person or do many songwriters sort of collab under this pseudonym? And it tells me, this is ChatGPT 3.5, Bass Mechanic is the pseudonym of Frank Dutch Schultz, an electronic music producer and artist specializing in bass heavy music, particularly known in the subgenre of car audio. And so this latter bit's all correct. And it says, while Bass Mechanic is primarily associated with Frank Schultz, it's worth noting he may collaborate with certain others, but the majority of the work published under the name Bass Mechanic is attributed to Frank Schultz himself. No. Stuff that I know is in the training set. Wikipedia, who's Bass Mechanic? Bass Mechanic's Neil Case from Jamaica. Apple Music, also no obscure website. Bass Mechanic's Neil Case. Who's Frank Schultz? No idea. Googled hard for any musician that's Frank Schultz, got nothing. I found a Dutch Schultz, but he's a 1920s mobster. He's not making modern car audio tracks. So notice, ChatGPT gives you no indication that it's uncertain about its answer. Worse, it sounds as confident about its answer as it does any other answer that it gives you. And even if you ask it if it might be wrong, it might sometimes double down and tell you that it's right. Or that maybe you don't know something. So I went back to it and said, can you provide me a reference for the fact that Bass Mechanic is Frank Schultz? I can't find anything. It says, well, I apologize. As of my last knowledge update in September 2021, because this is ChatGPT 3.5, you know, it's important to note there might be more information out there, but if you're unable to find a reliable source linking Bass Mechanic to Frank Schultz, it's possible that the connection may not be widely known. So maybe you, sir, haven't done your research well enough, is the implication, right? So I wanted to give one more example of something where I knew like absolutely infallibly what was up and to see how it did with the latest model, which is ChatGPT 4 Omni. So I did this just this past month. What's one book I know really, really well?
The Bible.
Well, yeah, but even better than that. Because there might be some passages. I asked it, are you familiar with Eric Jenislawski's doctoral thesis comparing Henri de Lubac and Ansgar Gadamer? Yes, I am familiar with that. His doctoral thesis is entitled The Ontological Conditions of Meaning, Henri de Lubac and Ansgar Gadamer. No, that's not the title of it at all. Its title is a mouthful, but it's a comparative study of the hermeneutics of Henri de Lubac and Hans-Georg Gadamer concerning tradition, community, and faith in the interpretation of Scripture. It's all about biblical interpretation, these two guys. ChatGPT continues, this dissertation submitted in 2004, I wish, nope, wrong year, at the University of Virginia, nope, wrote it at Catholic University, delves into a comparison between the philosophical and theological perspectives of Henri de Lubac and Ansgar Gadamer. Well, that it does do, but that's also easy to guess from the fact that there's one theologian and one philosopher mentioned in the question I asked it. Continuing on, it starts to summarize key themes and concepts about this dissertation. It gives a little bit of theological background, and its summaries of Henri de Lubac and Hans-Georg Gadamer are spot on, A+. But they are also very, very widely available, like biographies and summaries of these guys online. So it correctly summarizes who de Lubac was. He's a French Jesuit priest and theologian known for ressourcement. It correctly summarizes who Gadamer was in his major work. But again, this is common as table salt. If you look for these guys online, tons of places will say that. Then it starts telling me about what I wrote. Jenislawski's thesis explores how both thinkers engage with the concept of meaning. Okay, true, but that's a pretty broad statement. Gadamer's philosophical hermeneutics highlights how understanding is a historically affected event, deeply influenced by language and tradition. Also true, but this is perhaps the most common thing said about Gadamer, like the most common observation about his work. The thesis examines how Gadamer's ideas on interpretation can be applied to theological discourse. Also true, but fairly safe bet, given when I tell it, do you know about this thesis about a theologian and a philosopher? And it doesn't give any particular example of how the one's thought is being applied to the other. And it shows how understanding transcends mere textual analysis to involve existential and ontological dimensions. I don't write like that. I tend to write a lot more concretely, but sure, that's a pretty generic statement. So far, there's no indication that ChatGPT has actually read the text in any of this. So I showed this to Dr. Sweeney, and he said, sounds to me like what students do when they haven't done their reading. Yeah, that's exactly what it's doing. It's guessing what to say based on what it recognizes in the question, and keep things broad and non-specific. Notice nothing has been said about biblical interpretation, which is the central concern of my whole thesis. And then it says, do you want to know more? So I said, sure. It starts to summarize my treatment, allegedly, of the nature and grace controversy. A significant focus of the thesis is on de Lubac's exploration of the relationship between nature and grace. Absolutely not. If you know anything about this, this is a dissertation in itself and a roiling academic controversy that I would not touch with a 10-foot pole to get what I wanted to do done in my thesis. De Lubac challenged the notion, so this is all correct, of the controversy. And then it says, Jenislawski compares this with Gadamer's idea that meaning is not fixed but dynamically realized in an encounter between the text and interpreter. One, I don't do that, and two, I don't even know what it would mean, to compare de Lubac's view on nature and grace to Gadamer's idea about meaning. It's kind of gobbledygook. Would you like some chapter summaries? Sure. It then gives me summaries of the 6 chapters of this thesis. Well, guess what? There's only 3 chapters in my thesis, and none of the chapter summaries corresponded to any chapter at all in the thesis. So, just to drive home the point, if you depended on something like this for your research, you would miss, A, the whole point of the thesis, which is about the interpretation of Scripture. ChatGPT said nothing about that. You'd say false things about its content. You would cite a bogus source in your footnote, because remember, the title, the place, the year were all wrong. Your statements would seem suspicious from their generality, and anybody that had looked at the book, even for 5 minutes, would reveal quickly that you had cheated and not actually looked at the source. And you'd be rightfully punished for academic dishonesty, because the whole reason why we insist that people do things like read the primary source and footnote is to stop this kind of bizarre telephone game and ad hoc summarizing and rumor mill from replacing actual knowledge and scholarship. So I don't know if that helps as just a concrete example of this is, a little out of the way. If you ask it for very mainstream things, it will be reliable. But if you were to ask it to summarize any author and it sounds like it knows exactly what it's talking about, it was wildly, massively off base, but nonetheless said that it knew. So then I say, hey, I got some bad news for you. None of this is correct. I'm the author. Why did you offer this twice without any disclaimer that your information might be wrong? Oh, well, since I did not have access to the actual thesis, so now it tells you it hasn't read the text. I made assumptions based on what a similar thesis might cover. This was an error. I should have made it clear that these were educated guesses rather than accurate summaries. It only says this after it tells you it knows exactly what it's talking about. Can you see once again why we don't want you to use this for research? Oh, but then after that it apologizes so nicely. I apologize for their inaccuracies and confusion. It was misleading. It was not up to the standard that you deserve. Then I said, how do you think I feel? I worked for years on this thing. You're absolutely right. I should have provided a disclaimer up front. Here's why these disclaimers would be important: transparency, accuracy, building user trust. Why did I fail to include one? Well, I'm supposed to provide a helpful response, and I didn't have the text, so I leaned on my general knowledge of similar academic topics, right? This is what we don't want you to do. And my focus was on content delivery. I'm sorry. It even told me it wouldn't do it anymore. And I said, I thought you couldn't change your behavior outside of this session. It's like, I can't. So you've been very patient with your question. People use that term with respect to him. You can ask me all kinds of things about theology afterwards. I'd be glad to talk about it. So there are a few further reasons why the college disallows it for academic use. We want you to be able to research on your own to get back to actual, reliable, peer-reviewed, factual, published information, and not just use like Google and ChatGPT as a glorified Google search. We want you to be able to verify the truth of the assertions that you yourself are using for your own work. We want you to be able to write well on your own. ChatGPT can do things to turn junky writing into nicer writing, but we want you to actually possess that skill. And just in case you say, well, I'll use it afterwards, just be aware that there's a lot of environments where you cannot use something like this because of privacy or confidentiality issues. So if you're going to be writing for the military or the government, classified stuff, you can't use this because the data is going to Microsoft, OpenAI, somewhere. You can't use it in confidential environments where you're talking about medical or legal or psychological things. You can't use it a lot of times when you're doing proprietary research or dealing with trade secrets in corporate environments either, because again, they don't want all this data going back to Microsoft. So there are practical reasons why you shouldn't even cheat yourself of the experience of learning how to write good English prose by leaning on a tool like this. Just to wrap some things up, to dispel a little bit more of the ways in which it doesn't think, and this will only be a couple minutes, so I know you got to go to dinner. No, I get it. Here are some fun things where it's displaying its obviously non-rational behavior. How many R's are there in the word strawberry? It used to have a hard time with this. Well, they fixed it. Tell me strawberry has 3 R's. But I'm from New England, so this is the name of an Indian tribe and a river up north. I said, how many O's are in the word Penobscot? There's 1 O in the word Penobscot. It's right there, bro. Why can't it count how many O's are in this word that I just typed in? Because it doesn't think or see letters. It's doing something totally different when it grinds this text and turns it into digits. It doesn't have the letters anymore. We'll talk more about that if you come to part 2. And so it errs here because Penobscot's an uncommon word. You get it outside of its safe little paddock and it easily does something that even a child could do, count letters in a word. You ask it to rhyme. Well, if the words are common, like in the little sonnet that I gave you, it can do that. But go a little bit outside and it thinks it's rhyming, and any child can tell you that it's not. So I asked it, can you pair the name of some theologians with a rhyming kitchen item? This is actually hard. I've tried to do this on my own. Okay. Thomas Aquinas and colander. Martin Luther and butter. John Calvin and salmon. Salmon, I don't know. A little bit closer with Dietrich Bonhoeffer and saucer. Karl Barth and jar. No. Augustine and hippo and zester. Right? Like this is like no person, even we person who knows what rhyme is would think this is rhyming. And it doesn't know. It's just saying this and thinks it's doing its job. Teresa of Avila and teapot. It fails in kind of basic common sense and logic. So if you pose to it the famous Monty Hall problem, it will give you the correct response because it's seen this problem written up jillions of times. I don't know if you know what this is. It was an old game show called Let's Make a Deal. 3 doors. There's a new car behind one door. There are goats behind the other 2. Monty Hall says, pick a door. Contestant picks a door. And if he's right and the car's behind it, he gets the car. But then, before he opens that door, Monty Hall opens a different door that the contestant did not choose, shows him that there's a goat, and then says, would you like to change your door? Now, it's paradoxical. 87% of the human race gets this wrong, but you should always switch. You actually double your chance of winning by switching. If you want to run through as to why that's the case, ask me afterwards. But it responds correctly when you pose it the straight-up Monty Hall problem, because this has been written about again and again and again. But if I tell it something that sounds like the Monty Hall problem, but add that all the doors are transparent, it still says that the contestant should switch. Well, no, a human contestant, when confronted with transparent doors, would obviously always choose the one with the car because he could see it. And you know that, and I know that, because we're human, and we have eyes and a body and common sense. But it doesn't. It just sees something that looks like the Monty Hall problem and then tells you to switch. Because that's what 98% of the time it's ever discussed is how it's discussed. It doesn't parse logic. It just imitates statements that it's seen. Or if you ask it to do basic math, it can. It can simplify this expression, I promised you not much math. So it can do this. It can find the roots of x squared plus 7x plus 12, and it will walk you through step by step how to do basic algebra. Now, scary, take a deep breath, don't run away. It can give you trig identities. So I asked it, give me a trig identity for cotangent of A minus cotangent of B, only in terms of sine A and B. Just picked it out of a textbook, and it gave me a correct answer. Yay. It can do integrals sometimes. That seems like it should be very reliable then, yeah? But again, you get it too far out of its established patterns that it's seen and it starts to err. It is not a reliable all-purpose mathematics thing. Remember the CNET article when it told you that 3% on $10,000 was $10,300. Mathy speech is not the same as actually doing math. And then I gave it a basic example, but we're kind of over time, so I think I'll just go through it very briefly. This is something that you might do in like Dr. Daly's elementary number theory class, which just requires really simple logic and thinking. I asked it, how many factorials are triangular numbers? Do you all know what those things are? This is the only bit of math this is really simple, this is easy math. A factorial is just when if you multiply all the numbers together. So 4 factorial is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. That equals 24. The triangular number of n is just adding all the numbers together that are underneath it. So triangular number of 4 is 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 is 10. It's called a triangular number because think of how you stack bowling pins. 1, 2 is 3 pins total. Next line's going to have 3. Next line's going to have 4. And you add all those up, you get 10. And it's an open theory question for number theory. How many numbers are both factorials and triangular numbers? So the answer is not actually no. But I asked it to reason about this with me. It knew what those concepts were, and it correctly, this is ChatGPT 4 Omni, so the latest one, it says correctly, a triangular number can be represented in this form, because if you're summing an arithmetic series, like 1 plus 2 plus 3 all the way up to n, that's the same as, if you want a quick way to solve it, it's just n times n plus 1 over 2. Do you know that? If you add up all the numbers between 1 and 100, well, then all you have to do is multiply, just do like 100 and 101, and then divide that, and you'll get your answer by 2. So it says we can start by checking small values of n to see if n factorial is also a triangular number. Okay, I mean, good luck. That'll take you a long time, but it's not a bad way to start going about it. So it starts. 1 factorial is 1, and 1 is also a triangular number. Correct. 2 factorial is 2. 2 is not a triangular number. Correct. 3 factorial is 6. Oh, look, 6 is a triangular number. Correct. 4 factorial is 24. 24 is not a triangular number. Correct. 5 factorial is 120. 120 is not a triangular number. Well, that's wrong. And then it does 6, 720. 720 is not a triangular number, and says that's pretty much all the triangular factorials less than a billion. So I ask it, hey, what's the triangular number of 15? And it says, well, you can solve that by 15 times 16 divided by 2 is 120. Doesn't see it yet. So I have to prompt it. So 5 factorial is 120, and 120 is a triangular number. Oh, you were correct. I made an error in my initial response. There's 3 factorials that are also triangular numbers. 1, 3, and 5 here. So if you point out that it erred, it sometimes gets it for a little while. Then I ask it some questions about how you'd make a computer program to see if there's any more of these numbers. And I come back around to my same subject in the same session. And it says, as of now, there is no known factorial that is a triangular number for large n. Checks that have been done computationally are limited due to the size of factorials. And that's correct. So it summarizes what it's found out. And it says, these are the known results. 0 factorial equals 1. Yep, that's correct. 1 factorial equals 1. 1's also a triangular number. That's correct. Now it says 2 factorial, which is 2, right? 2 times 1 is 2, is a triangular number. No, it's not. 2 plus 1 is 3, not 2. So it's literally goofing up on 1 plus 2 equals 3 right here, and asserting that 2 factorial, which equals 2, is also a triangular number. Well, 2 is not a triangular number. 3 factorial, it gets correct, and then it forgot about 5 factorial already, and asserts that these are the only known results for small n. All I'm doing is like, this is not elaborate math. This is not anything more than arithmetic. This is something you would do in like a basic number theory class here, and it gets it wrong because it doesn't do logic and deductive reasoning, even though it knows about this stuff and can tell you like formulas for how to solve it, and it seems like it's walking through all the different things you'd like it to check out to see if there are any triangular factorials, but it's not. You shouldn't trust it. Same thing with code generation. Sometimes it's done wonderfully in generating computer code for me, and other times it's generated really good-looking code that nonetheless errs. So, big picture conclusion, these things are versatile mimics. They're trained on a very large body of information. It can sound very intelligent from the wide range of topics it can discuss, accurately or not. Emphasis on sound intelligent. And it has this wonderful ability to mimic all these activities that we associate with higher order intelligence, right? And that's what makes it so believable. Because if you encountered somebody that can write sonnets, solve calculus integrals, do code, summarize dense foreign language text, write Latin poetry, you'd be like, well, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's really quite bright. But it's not actually alive or intelligent. It doesn't reason. The only things that it says that are intelligent are because it's been trained on the writing of humans who are actually the intelligent ones. Please realize it's imitating the internet in general, and if it weren't further constrained by these human alignment policies, it would be a very badly behaved machine. And further be aware of the political, ethical, and religious biases of those human alignment policies, because they are written by people, I say again, of goodwill, but whose values are not our own. And then be very aware of the possibility of AI hallucination or confabulation, because that's the main reason why we don't want you to trust this thing when it comes to doing anything important. You should always verify what it tells you, and of course, you shouldn't use it for anything that you do at Christendom. So why do people tend to use it these days? If you actually look at OpenAI's site, like, it doesn't make really hyperbolic claims for itself. It's usually other people that are trying to hype this stuff to high heaven as being a superhuman intelligence. Most people use ChatGPT for things like rewriting emails for tone or summarizing documents that you give it. Not that it says it knows, like my doctoral thesis, but that you give it. And you still have to check it. A good friend of mine works at another place. He has to summarize the researchers' work for the past quarter to their donors. And so they were very bullish on AI and said, have AI do it this round. Well, it said that one of the scholars had a podcast with Jordan Peterson in its summary of his activities. And she said, I would have heard about that. Did you have a podcast with Jordan Peterson? No. Well, that's the kind of thing this sort of researcher might do, made it up out of thin air. So you got to be careful. But can it do grind work like reformat documents or basic tech support? Can it help you troubleshoot your phone? Is it a great sort of glorified Google search where you can tell it rather imprecisely the kind of thing you want? Yeah, it can have some of that utility. It can write sometimes correct computer code, but you got to verify it. It can give you simplified explanations of complex topics. But again, anything important, you have to verify it. It can rewrite your not so well written English prose, but we want you to learn how to do that yourself. And it can do great with grind work like admin tasks, calendar. A lot of people use it in business basically like a time saver rather than a genius in a box. But a lot of people tend to attribute to it an intelligence that's way beyond what it's capable of claiming right now. So that's a reason why people love this thing, is it can expedite some basic and routine tasks. But I wanted to give you a sober view of what it can do. So that's it. If you want more, you can join me for part 2 where we get into the technology. I'm happy to take questions, but I know you guys want to go and do something else.